So now me and Artemiy, Kotov and Zinina want to share with you the results of our research. As you can see, the title of our presentation is The Perception of Multimodal Hedges in the Communicative Behavior of a Companion Robot. And as it may be obvious from the title, we were interested in hedges and assumed that a robot is a nice platform to study them. Let me quickly tell you what hedges are. I think some of you know this already, but just to make sure that we are on the same track. In our everyday life, we quite often have to do some unpleasant actions like giving orders or expressing our opinion openly or asking for help or making mistakes. And we may feel quite uncomfortable when we find ourselves in this kind of situations, in situations of social face loss, when we have to acknowledge our mistake, or in cases of face-threatening acts, when the speaker commands the hearer. And all these cases were described by the linguistic theory of politeness. Hedges is one of the politeness strategies that help to make the utterance less definitive and meet the criteria of politeness. And in general, it helps us to establish friendly relationship during communication. So our goal was to assess the difference between the perception of the companion robot that uses hedges, multimodal hedges, as compared to a robot that uses a more neutral communicative strategy. And we decided to contrast hedges with an addressive strategy. Our first hypothesis was that combined verbal and non-verbal hedges make a robot sound polite. And our second hypothesis was that robotic hedges can make people feel the emotional attachment to the robot and value the robot as friendlier and more sympathy-provoking, more emotional. So let's watch two videos that show how it was, how our robot behaved.
Science, it seems. Science, das ist.
So all our behavioral models were taken from the Russian emotional corpus, and we looked at the behavior of real people during the exam situation, and we were interested not just in speech hedges, but also in those gestures that they demonstrated while giving an answer. And according to these samples, we then have created robot response protocols for the first condition. To test hypothesis, we have executed an experiment where two emotional companion robots, F2, have been answering 8 real exam questions of the university course to the user. And the participants, they read all the questions and answers in advance. And all our participants, they started randomly either with the second condition, that's with the robot that used hedges, or with the first condition with the robot that used hedges, or with the second condition with the robot that used some addressive partners. Then the next slide shows us the structure of the experiment. The robot was evaluated according to the scales of semantic differential, and the moment at which the robot began to give an answer was controlled by the experimenter through the Wizard of Oz. So the robot's responses, they were written in advance, would just control the moment when the robot began to speak. The next slide shows in detail what each robot's response for every question consisted of. Both robots demonstrated hesitation. It was the same, but it was not just one gesture for all situations. It was a set of gestures for one and for one on the other condition, but they were equal. Then the robot reported its answer with some kind of gesture expressing thoughtfulness, and it was the same in two conditions. And finally, in the first condition, the robot demonstrated the hedge using speech and gesture, like saying, "I believe so," and he said, "I believe so," and bit his lip. Or the second robot demonstrated addressive strategies, that's something like, "That's it," and made a head gesture towards the interlocutor. And finally, our results. The first hypothesis was not confirmed, unfortunately, and the robots that used hedges did not seem to be more polite. Perhaps because the situation did not correspond to the perception of hedges as an attempt to be more polite, as during the exam, the politeness in this form as being like 100% sure in your answer, still using phrases like "I believe so," just not to be that arrogant or like showing off, is not that obvious. But now we've just conducted another experiment in which this kind of politeness would probably be more appropriate. And the second hypothesis was confirmed, and you can see our statistical results in the table on the slide. The results show that the use of verbal and non-verbal hedges allows the speaker to create an image of a more friendly and sympathy-provoking interlocutor. And we also interviewed our participants after and asked them why they perceived that robot that well, the robot that used hedges. And some of our participants said that they identified themselves with that robot because they know the situation of like being on an exam, and they began to sympathize with him. And other students, they took the position of a teacher and said that it was bad that the robot was inaccurate in his answers, but still they saw that he was nervous and sympathized. It turns out that introduction of hedges can not just create an image of a more friendly and sympathy-provoking interlocutor, but also can make robots more emotionally pleasant for people. It allows people to establish an emotional connection with robots, and they identify themselves with the robot that experiences spatial loss and try to compensate that using hedges. And in the field of applied robotics, hedges can be used in situations when the robot cannot execute a human request perfectly and is forced to be partially incorrect or incomplete. In these cases, communicative hedges make the robot more comfortable to communicate with. Thank you very much for your attention. I think that now we can answer. We'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Maria. Are there any questions in the audience? Okay. While we're waiting, I find it quite interesting that in your finding, it's like depends on whether the participants side as a student or they take the perspective of teacher. They have very different, I guess, perception towards the robot. Like it's interesting how from, I guess, different perspective, the same robot behavior would appear differently. So are you going to, I guess, in the future work, explore more of like either controlling which perspective the participants are taking or applying these hedges to a scenario other than the exam?
Well, yes, we just have conducted an experiment in which the robot was not in the position of a student that is supposed to make some mistake, not supposed, but has to make some mistakes because he doesn't know the material that well, but in the place of a teacher who, well, may be that person who threatens the face of our participants. And well, it will be very interesting what the results will be.
Yeah.
Would this robot be perceived as more polite?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Hey, thanks, Maria. Any other questions? If not, then again, you can find the, oh wait, there's a question from Victor. The gesture communication can be situational depending on the situation to which it is applied. Some gestures can be more effective, maybe testing in different situations like in the market as a receptionist.
Well, thank you. I think it's maybe interesting also.